Wow, thank you so much. Well, I think people are still getting into the room, but if you're a repeat guest, people have already heard your best lines. I think we'll be all right. I should also start off by thanking you all for having me back. It's an extraordinary privilege to be coming back to the same event this year again. And I will say this very honestly, that there's not many political forums and conferences that I attend every year. This is probably only one of two that I do. So it is an extraordinary privilege. And one thing that actually comes with that privilege is that you're not giving a lecture anymore. You're not coming here to speak. You're actually having an ongoing dialogue. And that actually changes some of the things that one is about to say. And also I wanted to thank the team that almost become real friends, and many of them have actually visited me in Brussels, and I encourage everyone here who has an interest of doing so to feel free to reach out to me. And yeah, Mr. Uho Bloom, who actually found me initially at Eurofact, has become a very, very good friend of mine. And so I kind of think of myself almost like a very happy visitor to Turkey. Anyway, with that said, being a repeat guest also means that you don't want to repeat all the same lines. And I was going to say that in my previous speeches, I warned about Europe's lagging competitiveness. But the warning was not so much about Europe falling behind, but it's also due to the fact that the rest of the world is catching up. It has very much to do with the fact that Europe has chosen to stay and dig where it stands. We do the things we do the things that we always done. And that also means that India and China is very, very willing to catch up and try to take that seat as number 2 in the world order. I also warned about United States being ahead of Europe in terms of productivity. US is about 10% ahead of us in terms of the value that every worker managed to create for every hour worked. It has nothing to do with the labor cost. It has nothing to do with lacking regulations or whatnot. It's just due to the fact that they are much, much more technological advanced. And this 10% gap is something that we've tried to close for the last 30 years. And we never really managed to do that. And that's not really just the main issue. It's actually also the fact that, once again, the rest of the world is becoming more productive because they want to basically reach where we are. And also, I warned about Europe believing too much in status quo. The world has changed. And the last time I was here, at the same time last year, I said 40% of the world is heading toward the ballot box to choose their leaders. And predominantly then, as well now, what we've seen in the election of the United States, obviously, but also India and Europe itself, is that many of the powers around the world want to see a changing world order. What does that mean? Most of the world are actually looking for a change in the world order that is going to be completely against Europe's interest. I'm not here to say, or I wasn't here to say that the world is out to get us, but I'm just saying that predominantly the majority of the world, including people of Europe, wants to see a change that is perhaps not entirely with our interest. And that leads me to the first point about what's happening in the United States. When I graduated from university in the sort of mid-90s, I chose international trade and trade negotiations, my expertise. I remember because in the US there was elections when Bill Clinton became the president. And in the United States, you always do a list of the top topics that electors care about. International trade was then number 30. I remember number 29 was federal funding for playground. So at a dinner party, I'll be moderately less interesting than the guy who was doing a PhD on federal funding for playgrounds. That is no longer the case. I'm not sure if I'm getting invited to intercollegiate dinner parties anymore, but international trade is number one of the key topic. And I will start by saying that you've probably all seen the headlines about how we now have some kind of a truce with the Trump administration. We have accepted 15% in tariffs in return for us buying more defense equipment, which we don't mind, and buying more liquid nitrogen gas and LNG, and which we are probably going to do anyway. And this year, I'm here to warn you that our troubles are not over. This is just starting. We went into these negotiations thinking that we are negotiating tariffs. We are not. What United States want has been remarkably consistent, and it has nothing to do with tariffs. What United States wanted was to have a macroeconomic balance. Sorry, I don't want to become economic, and I don't want to become academic. But what United States want is a lower trade deficit, simply because it cannot explain to its voters why the most technologically advanced and most skillful labor in the world is running a trade deficit. Imagine Finland explain to its constituents, or imagine Germany that is running a trade deficit. We can't explain it. I can explain it, and many of you can probably explain it to a central banker and someone who has a PhD in economics, and it has to do with the capital balance versus current account, etc., etc. But for a regular voter, how can a skillful and successful country, like the three countries I mentioned, ever run a trade deficit? They cannot explain it, and they cannot win elections unless they can explain it. And so far, United States have tried to basically boost its export through trade agreements. And that has been the rule of the game. And what I think we are seeing now is a major shifting of the US economic balance, where they're saying that these rules, this equilibrium that we have created, is not working for us. And if you're facing that kind of line of argument and thinking that United States must consume less, invest more, and export more or import less, what you end up is actually a United States that look remarkably more like, maybe not Finland, but at least France. And when Donald Trump talks about a child doesn't need 27 dolls, maybe it just needs 4. I don't know how many dolls a child deserves, but what an economist here is that maybe United States have an overconsumption that is fueled by consumer credit. It's borrowing money from abroad in order to buy those 23 dolls that it doesn't need. So what I'm here to warn is to say that, no, our troubles are not over just because we agree to a 50% tariff. We can scream and shout, it's unfair, it's against the rules. Agreed, agreed, agreed. Free trade is great, agreed. But basically, United States trade deficits is actually funding and financing a lot of export-led growth, either directly or indirectly. And if they decide that they don't want to pay, someone else has to pay. The question is, are we ready to open up our markets to the same extent that the United States have done? Are we ready to open up our agriculture? Are we ready to open up a public procurement? For real? On that point, I am not sure if we are ready to shoulder that responsibility. Responsibility in global economics means that you're actually paying for someone else's benefits, not just for Finland, not just for Sweden, not just for the whole of the EU, but also for people in Indonesia, or even people that we might call adversals, like China. So, with that said, I also want to warn that we tend to think US-China conflict as the one really defining conflict of our era. I agree. But we shouldn't forget the fact that for the United States, the main commercial rival remains Europe. Boeing competes against Airbus, not Chinese Comac. Their engineering companies are competing against our engineering companies. Their automakers are fighting for market shares in the same way that our companies, in the exact same price and quality bracket. That makes a difference. And also, when it comes to soft power, United States is not fighting Chinese influence in terms of regulations when it comes to agricultural standards, food standards, chloride chicken, hormone beef, or digital regulations. The regulatory competition in the world is actually between Europe and the United States. And that beef, to say the least, is still uncooked. And to continue, I wanted to also mention the question about China. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we're doing currently is not just how we see China, but also miscalculating what China actually wants. It's easy to frame China as an adversarial, and I do, to a large degree. It goes against every bone in my body and everything I believe in terms of economics and politics. But at the same time, we have to recognize the fact that there are two major growth engines in the world. If you look at growth, not in percentage, but in billions, China and the United States will generate approximately $700 billion / euro worth of growth this year. So when we are talking, actually, when the European Commission or our governments are talking about expanding our market share, expanding our international presence, all the market shares beside growth is already allocated. Oh, by the way, just to give you a little bit of perspective, our growth in Europe, our single market, is just 1/10 of the one of China or United States. Size matters. It's not just about the size of the market, but it's also the growth of the market. India is growing twice the rate of Europe. That's the reality. Anyway, going back to China. When we are talking about growing our market shares, basically, if all the market shares are taken, it has to come out of that growth. There's only United States and China where we have a reasonable chance because we are quite a sizable economy with a quite a sizable export. That basically means that if the United States is closing its door, if we want to grow our exports, we are basically condemning ourselves to opening up China. You have to either do it by cooperation or by force. I don't think it had really dawned on us what it actually means. And also, I want to warn against miscalculation of China. Because, one, the strategic rivalry with the United States is indeed very, very true. China invests considerable amount of both industrial capacity, but also military capacity, and these two are very linked in China, to deflect United States' attempt to contain it. But United States is where it is. China respects power. China does not respect weakness. That's how global politics and business works. China is not after to replace United States. Not in this cycle. I would even go as far as not this century. What China is after to do is to replace Europe as number 2. And here's where I'm not just talking about strategic hard power. I'm also talking about market shares. I'm talking about businesses. China is going all in on EVs and infrastructure equipment. These are not necessarily a threat to the United States. This is primarily a threat against the European commercial interests. So I think that's really important to bear that in mind. And also, China's fear is not necessarily about what we think it is, about potential crumbling of its own internal system. Sure, it worries about destabilization. It has a fragile political system, and unlike what many people believe, I don't think the Communist Party is completely in charge of the economy, simply because no one has ever run China with an iron grip. It's too big. There are sinologists who say that actually Xi Jinping's power over Chinese economy shouldn't be overestimated, and it's somewhere along the lines of Ursula von der Leyen's. So Xi Jinping controls the economy of Sichuan to the same extent that Ursula von der Leyen controls the economy of Turku. I'll leave that aside, but the key question here is about the fear of being cornered, the fear of being contained. I think that I heard the question about Russia coming up several times and China in the part of that equation. And I think one of its fears is not so much about supporting or not supporting Ukraine. It's looking after its own primary self-interest, which is about they don't want to be in an economy or global system where either Russia or China or anyone can be isolated. In our case, we dominate the financial system. Kicking China out of a system like SWIFT would have devastating consequences. If all Chinese companies were treated by American sanctions like Huawei has been treated in the last 5 years, the Chinese saga is over. Right, and which brings me to the question about Russia. And I will be very brief on that point because I think that's a topic that's going to come up on several times. And now I think in the end, the global economy is less dependent on Russia than anything else. Let me explain why. Economically, Russia is a non-power. It's not even a huge market for us. It is a market for some of the German luxury exports, for example, on Mercedes sedans. But if you're in the business of making Mercedes sedans, I would suggest that you do something else than overpriced tin cans. But that's something completely different. That's my own personal opinion. But Russia's only claim to global relevance is that it can create very expensive problems for Europe for a very, very low cost. It could open up the borders through Belarus to basically let criminals flow into Lithuania. Why? Because it could create those problems. If Europe's relevance is declining, Russia's relevance is declining even faster. The key question that we have regarding Russia is about where we get our energy. And here's I'm getting really, really worried. We are on a path towards sustainable society, which I, as a Nordic, and for my own personal conviction, am very much in favor of. But I'm not blind to that cost. And if the rest of the world that says we actually don't want to pay that cost, we are going all back into fossil fuels, then I have to be very blunt and answer how the invisible hand in Europe is going to respond. The market's going to respond by saying, either we fix this energy parity or the investments start to flow abroad. And that has already happened. I know it's getting very dark, and I know that they play the Addams Family here in this theater. So this is kind of the uncensored version of the Addams Family, I know. But we will cheer up in a brief second, but please do bear with me for a few more moments while this Frankenstein of a political speech is taking its toll. But what I wanted to say here is basically that we are asking now for a number of political initiatives that we need to invest in our innovation and industrial capacity, and we need to build our capabilities in order to basically support our way of life. I get that. People are asking for public funding to do so. Once again, a believer in the Nordic model, I can see pros and cons of that structure. I don't mind the government sharing the risk of a major capital investment. But what I get really, really, say, ambivalent about is when people, especially the private sectors, is looking for investment into R&D in Europe, but they are not putting their own money into it. Why? The profit margins in Europe are still too low compared to the United States, China, and even India. The best way to reward risk is profit. If you have a healthy profit in a society, if we can actually reward startups, if we can reward risk takers, that it makes it worthwhile, we wouldn't have a funding problem. And right now, if I look at the European multinationals, even the manufacturing companies like the auto industry have aggregated so much capital, they don't actually need any loans. They don't need capital. They can fund all the R&D they want. They have become banks. They make money by managing money rather than building cars or dams or planes. That, to me, doesn't sound like a sustainable economic system. Right. So this brings me basically towards the end of the happy end of the saga. One of the future bright spot is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is going to boost 30% of our productivity. This is our way to catch up. And as one last final disappointment, we have agreed in Europe into an EU AI Act. There are a number of reasons why we had to do it. We were in the middle of elections, and a number of people had to produce some kind of a deliverable, a political deliverable, to show that we are doing something in Brussels. Hey, believe it or not, but even people in new politics have key performance indicators. And the worst part is that it's like a TV talent show. You get voted out. Anyway, to wrap up that point around AI, I don't see currently, despite our network of alliances and free trade agreements, I don't see anyone going EU's path and thinking that regulating this is a good idea. I happen to speak Japanese fluently. I can tell when a Korean is lying. I understand some Chinese. I speak Californian if I want to, or if I want to impress some lady. I'll put on a nice American or British accent. But what I can see across the world is that no one, regardless which political system you have, no country has chosen to detail, regulate, and create a liability around AI the way that the EU has. Even the Chinese have said it's too early to regulate. Europe is a collective leadership model, which means that if everyone makes a mistake, nobody has to face the political consequences. Our voters don't know what the European People Party is, or whether S&D is a socialist, or who's actually in the political group. I think a part of the collective leadership has led to this point where we can actually produce these laws without thinking about these consequences, where China, Japan, United States, including California, have said, we want to see where this is going. It's too early to regulate. We can shoot ourselves in the foot. If we were the fastest growing economy in the world, and if we were the most productive economy in the world, I would say, let's go for this, let's go for net zero, let's wing it and see what happens. We don't have the luxury. And this brings me to the final point where this is the crescendo. Donald Trump talks about the weave. I wouldn't go as far as saying that I'm such a good speaker like Mr. Donald Trump. At least I'm very different. But I think it comes down to a factor that is much bigger than just regulations or trade agreements or 15% or 10%. It comes down to a European psyche. I think the fundamental problem cannot be solved just by thinking differently about how we approach Europe. And I think this is also where Finland, together with its neighbors, hello, is that an old Nokia? Just checking. Anyway, kudos to you. I admire nationalism. But anyway, to wrap it up, I think here's where we have the biggest contribution to make, because we have always lived with the mentality of catching up. And this is not a luxury that Nordic countries had. Whereas if you look at continental Europe, you have the basically default mindset that things were going great, and if we do nothing, things will continue to be great. That's not how the world works. People, ambitious people, skilled people, and sometimes vicious people wants to replace us. And to some degree, is there a fair right to have a chance to develop new products, to have access to global markets? Then how you do it, why you do it, differs vastly between, let's say, Finland and, let's say, Russia or China. But in the end, everybody has a fair chance to try. And they are trying, they are working hard, for the reason that they want to create a better future for their children, sometimes with very adversarial means. I think that we need to bring that mentality back into Europe. That's one of the most important points I want to say today. And that's what I feel is lacking. There is no responsibility. I heard a European commissioner, former European commissioner, talk about one of her regulations, one of the most intrusive business regulation, as a mistake. But does she resign from politics? No. Imagine an American politician or a Japanese or Indonesian going up and saying, you know what I did 3 years ago is the worst that happened to my country. And by the way, please vote for me again. That still happens in Europe. Anyway, so a different mentality, and realizing that the problems are far from over. United States is after to get us on tax. It's not just about tariffs. Until it gets its economic balance in order, they are after to get Europe's lunch. China is after to get us. And maybe we get the technology backwards. And perhaps here as I start to maybe overstay my welcome and start to wrap up. And yeah, thank you for having me again.
Thank you, Hosuk, and please don't leave the stage, but take a seat, please.
Thanks.
So, we will now move on to our panel discussion. In today's panel, we will consider whether it is time for innovation policy and how business-driven research and development can thrive in a transforming Europe. Our first panelist is member of the Finnish Parliament, vice chair of the Grant Committee, and she served as member of the European Parliament until 2024. Please welcome Mia-Petra Kumpula-Natri. Next one is Kenneth Videll from Wärtsilä. He is the General Manager, Research, Coordination and Funding, Sustainable Fuels and Decarbonization. Welcome. And last but not least is Lasse Leppäkorpi from Cardiosignal, Operation Executive from Cardiosignal. And please do check out Cardiosignal if you don't know the company. They have very interesting products and applications. So do that after the panel discussion. And we will hear a little bit about Cardiosignal, I suppose, during the discussion as well. And as a reminder to everybody, you are free to participate through the chat. Maybe we can have the QR code in the background for a while. Use your phone and put up some questions, and I will come back to those questions during the panel discussion. Okay. Let's take first a kind of a warm-up question for everybody. Let's start from here as a round. What kind of or what types of companies and innovations are you monitoring particularly closely right now? If you have any specific ones you would like to tell us about. Kenneth.
Thank you. Well, of course, being publicly listed, we won't say which companies we're looking into, but innovations, yes. And of course, I think all companies are looking closely at innovations which are in their value chain, may it then be their core or next to. So in our case, then it's the marine value chain and of course the energy, the power generation, which is very close. And emphasis clearly is on the green transition and energy efficiency.
And those topics are hot at the moment.
They are very hot, of course, and I think Hosik made a very good point. I also had some points about this, that at the end of the day, I mean, this is all going to cost us something, and I think that's something that the public has to understand. Because if the sustainable solutions would be cheaper than the fossil ones, we wouldn't be here, would we? So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Mia-Petra.
Yes, for my 10 years in the European Parliament, it has been a lot on the digital and climate. And without digitalization, someone else is making the digital, and then we just get to use it. And I think that's very similar. And the others, as a great speech here was showed us that others are running faster, so we have to run and not keep the position that we have. So also that holds with the climate solutions. The biggest investor so far is still China, even we are challenging politically them to be faster and not to peak highest emission later. So these innovations are globally needed, whatever the politics will say. But then of course now my interest is a lot on the innovations on the dual use and security, because that is a new challenge. Even the old challenges have not been solved yet. And also I think the one global that Finland has been good in looking at is on health, that remains also to be there. But summarizing up, strategically important innovations are very much and should be high in the agenda on the European level.
Okay, thank you. Lasse.
Yeah, I think for me the really interesting in innovation is where you can package truly a complex research and innovation to simplify it for the end user. I was working many years for Apple there in San Francisco Bay Area, and it was all about simplifying so that the end user can get it. It's very complex things, but for the end user it's simple. And now it's obviously influencing my work at Cardiosignal, like you mentioned. It is the recognized breakthrough innovation globally, now coming from Finland, actually coming from Turku. So really cool that we have this technology from Finland. But what that is doing is we are changing a smartphone. Every people nowadays have a smartphone. Now a diagnostic device that it already has the sensors in it. It has motion sensors. So if you keep that 1 minute on your chest, we can analyze the mechanical function of the heart and give a simple answer and detect most the major heart diseases. And this makes healthcare much more accessible to everybody anywhere. Like, it doesn't matter what's your socioeconomic status, what's your digital literacy or skill level, you can access healthcare anywhere, like improving health equality. And it's good to see that it's recognized in Europe by innovation rewards, as well as designated as a breakthrough device by FDA in US.
Great. Thank you. Hosuk, any specific?
Well, I think these are all great points. And since I'm not an engineer, at least not a successful one, I went to 1 year in engineering school and it was way too hard. So I went into a completely different field. And also I didn't want to sort of like live up to an Asian stereotype. But I must say there are a couple of things that come to mind. One is it's not so much about where innovation is made, but how its innovation is made. And I think that we heard that from the previous answer as well in a very good way, that there is a synergy, for example, between, for example, IT and healthcare. There is also the synergy between, even if I look at 5G and 6G technologies, that's now being combined with sensory technology, for example, heart readings and eye movements, in order to create next generation of new networks. And I think that's really interesting. And the same things with material technology, because that's basically converging to atom-level chemistry. And it's not enough to master one domain. You have to master at least 3, 4. And one final point, if I may add, is actually what we don't think about. There's a great deal of innovation in finance. And this is where a lot of countries are beating us. How some countries can actually, to our image, it seems like they can give away their stuff for free and still make money. They're beating us in our game, which is banking.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Let's move to the current state and maybe the direction as well of European innovation policy. We have tools like public R&D funding and supporting private finance and test beds and accelerators and innovation-friendly regulation and all kinds of different tools that the EU can hand out to boost innovations and help the businesses to innovate. What is, in your opinion, some of the kind of most important tools, maybe for your companies or in general, that the EU has in its arsenal? Last.
Of course, funding. That is the most important, like different ways of funding, but also the a connection, making it through these consortiums available to create connections between the public sector, private sector, research, and also across the borders. So, but really, it's often comes through the funding. Another areas are harmonization and the regulation, especially harmonization, and hopefully also some deregulation, and not just the regulation, but the making it more of a single market than the collection of fragmented markets, like it still pretty much is. And that's one of the reasons I think US and China are seen as a more interesting markets for the capital and innovation, because they are seen as a single large markets instead of a collection of small markets. Still, even the EU is doing a great job trying to remove that fragmentation.
Yeah. We know that in health tech, the regulations are somewhat slowing down the business. Is this something that you feel as a company as well? Is your product and applications regulated?
Yeah, that's definitely the area where the more harmonization would be. Like, there are international standards, not necessarily US standards or European standards, but international standards. We need more of those. We need harmonization across these markets, and especially in this regulation, like medical devices, we could take these truly impactful technologies and innovations into use in all of these markets much more rapidly, creating value instead of having every single area like having this protectionism through regulation.
Yeah. How about you, Kenneth? How does this?
I agree with what Lasse is saying. I would maybe emphasize on sort of 3 points, as that is now very popular, 3 points. So, and this comes maybe more to the European Commission than to the national one. That for us, I believe, not only for Wärtsilä, I believe for all of us, that we need to stay technology agnostic in our policy, so we don't give in too much to dictate which technology will then prevail. We have a saying that we believe that our customers, because when they buy our services products, they will use them for 30, 40 years. So it's not only the investment cost, it's the whole life cycle cost which is of importance there. And if we then strive to drive towards something new, which we don't know the life cycle cost of, then that's a bit scary in a sense. So remain technology agnostic is number one, and then when it comes to regulation, extremely important to be stable and stay on course. Again, if the cycle is 4 or 5 years and the politics change and the regulations change, it's very difficult for customers to make these investment decisions. And now maybe more to the Nordics, so Finland, Sweden, did due to political reasons, change in the fuel mandate, for example. And that has, of course, had led to, for example, Neste, who is still front runner in making sustainable fuels, which are drop-in. They are now suffering. So, I mean, that's very unfortunate and very difficult for the companies then to predict if there is sort of a stable, predictable regulation. And then maybe the third, like Lasse said, the funding bureaucracy. I have to say, as we have both EU and national funding programs and projects, and hopefully the national parties are not here, because of course, Finn doesn't say when everything's going well, but I have to say that Business Finland is not bad compared to the European funding programs, because they are quite cumbersome. So there's a lot of improvements made in the national funding as well, but then if you compare again to the US, where there are targets set, okay, and then you reach those targets and you get the funding, and not, now I'm being, of course, cutting some corners, target set, and then 17 pages of how you are supposed to get there. So there is something still to be improved.
So how does this sound from a policymaker?
The bad engineer who end up in the politics.
and just to be clear, it's not meant to be you against.
No. I chose myself this career, so I love it. Otherwise, I would work for Wärtsilä or some other company, because I was educated in Vaasa, where they have the biggest R&D to be an engineer. But then, the regulation, European regulation is better than often said, because this is part of lobbying. European regulation is one regulation instead of 27 different ones. Then we are not successful enough making implementation so that would be enough. So cardio could have like one regulation to fulfill and go for whole markets easily. So this is why we should purely be better single markets. But then also we do have regulation that creates demand. And also we have a regulation that we have been successful, that everyone is proud of afterwards. I think there's no one in the room who would say like, oh, it's so bad that Finland started to regulate on the decarbonization, because you love it to say to the foreigners that welcome to Finland, where we have like electricity production 96% emission free. It was not the old energy companies who came to the politicians that please regulate us. Please make it a little bit more expensive. And now we do have industries who say that, yeah, there is a cost for transition, but let's do it and let's regulate it good way, let's finance it, let's have this common spirit to do it. And that's where I think that we in Finland have chosen very, very good paths. Even here we see that fluctuation after the elections, which is always bad. But then I think that there was like idea of the climate law, for example, that we know that this is the direction to do. And I was happy even our nowadays government, I'm in opposition, didn't change the climate law. So that should give some predictability. And then we look at several law cases are going different. So that is my speech for explaining the regulation. So also it was great speech on AI Act that I was also regulating for my part for the sandboxes and others to try to make it also enabler, but then trusted AI systems to come. And whether to say it's too early, quite many people were thinking it was too late. And that was happened. So some stages were too late, like the climate. We were all too long, very dark way, polluting the nature. Or we were very long on unregulated surrounding for the social media. So that's why it was a good try to put framework, not to regulate technology, but to regulate AI systems on the markets, like we have for the medical advice applications, or we have for the medicines. I don't go to a pharmacy to sign every time a consent, yes, I'm going to swallow a pill. But I trust the market. So, but then on the details, I'm very happy if the better version will be implemented very soon. But also to give up, start from the beginning, very much lobbying is not a good idea also. But for the R&D, I think the regulation has a bad reputation, but in my eyes, implementation could be better and permissions. When we have a new innovation, according to all the laws, it needs a permission because it's first of a kind, and then 3 years later, okay, I go to other markets because there I can go to markets. In Europe, I can go to the laboratory, and this needs to be also changed.
I would like to come back to the financing part maybe later as well, but the audience is already making my job much easier by asking questions, and there's one I would like to take now as it's relevant, I think. It's directed to you, Hosuk, but I think if you want to answer, and then everybody can comment if they like. How can we encourage companies to risk more and increase the profit from R&D instead of acting like banks? And then if you have an idea on that, then maybe you can comment on from business part at least.
Well, couple of reflections. One of the most obvious answers in terms of how to boost profits in an economy is actually to say that it is okay to make money. It is okay. If you innovate a new drug, we are going to reward you handsomely, and you are allowed to make a profit out of it. And that goes a little bit against the Nordic mentality that, especially the Swedish one, you should never believe that you're better than anyone else, and you're not allowed to make any money unless you're one of the founding families of Sweden, what I mean. But I think there is another, perhaps more down-to-earth approach to that, which is, we should really think about how we set our taxes. I mean, one of the great models of Finland and other countries that we realize that we don't tax growth, we encourage growth. Without growth, there is nothing to redistribute. And I think that's a key factor. The other factor that I would also point to is the question about regulation. I mean, as I laid out very clearly, and it's going to be a very boring debate because we all agree, I think nobody wants to have anarchy, but it's not black and white. And I am kind of ambivalent to the question of whether we should be first to regulate before we even have a market failure that we see in front of us. There are different schools of that, and I have a lot of respect for people who say that, no, this is an intolerable risk. But also, you should remember that if you remove the risk from a society, you also remove profits. That's the basic law of business. If you regulate a 100% safe and secure economy, you don't have any profits. That's the way it works. And in a system, economic system, where we are in a competition about talent, business, capital, innovations, we can't afford to be the one that rewards innovators least. That is going to have an effect. This is an equation, this is a classic having the cake and eat it, which simply doesn't add up. That's all I'm saying. I'm in favor of making a choice on that curve between risk and profit. I'm just saying that our choice is very, very different from the rest of the world. And this goes back to what I was saying before about AI. The rest of the world have said it's too early to say. And we have said, no, it's too late. I think one of the two is going to be severely punished. And I will not, because I'm not in a bet making, and I will not make that judgment. However, there is one thing that I want to add, because in part because of we have great innovative companies that are present here today and talking about this. One thing I see in the European layer, which is that we have less of a technical expertise. And I think that's really damaging. We don't have people who knows anything about AI making up the regulations. And it goes the same thing when it comes to medical devices. And that's a fundamental problem if you act upon principles rather than actual risks. And that creates a very dangerous trend towards over-regulation.
Lasse and Kenneth, how do you feel about risk and profit? Is the balance correct for you?
For me, I won't repeat because I'm totally agreeing with the, especially after living in the US, the attitudes and toward the getting profit and toward the success and taxation. So I agree with all of that. But I get back to that also, that the profit comes also from scale, being able to scale in the market. And going back to that, like whenever Europe is seeing, what I mentioned earlier, seeing as a collection of small markets rather than a one big market, you're always having a bigger cost to create the scale. And that eats the profit.
Yeah. Yes, fully agree. I was thinking more of the risk-taking, yes, and was it Edison who said that 1% is the idea and 99% is work to get it forward. So, of course, there's a lot of work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get there, and sometimes you fail. Out of our 100 internal ideas, 3 will go forward, meaning that 97% is thank you, goodbye. And what Hosuk said about mitigating or how do we carry this risk and could there be taxes? Probably there are new tools that could be done here for companies who then fail, and there's still a cost. And if that partly is mitigated, even the failure, then that reduces the risk to continue and take the next challenge on. So there could be some tools maybe there, but that's maybe more up Hosuk's alley how to do the financing there. But clearly also to look. I was very pleased when you said about in your speech about, or was it here on the sofa, about also having new financial instruments innovated or business models, because there was a lot to be done there as well. So it's not only technological innovation which is needed; it's everywhere, and even social innovation is needed. So, yeah.
Yes, what comes to the political side of the R&D and what is on the businesses, it's much on the businesses after having this R&D financing and part. And then we have been seeing too long in Finland also this marketable products is a question. So really thanks for people doing it from the labs to the markets. And that is also that we know kind of debt volley for the financing and seems to be European level as well. So we are missing on some of these families or financing, but it's getting better. So for the guest, I want to say that it's changing in Finland. I'm a Nordic social democrat, and so I love taxes. So that is the feeling. But then it's changing. We have a great startup ecosystem built. So 300 companies. And then the taxation day, what my friends in Brussels never learned or believed on is that we have public taxation. And these startup ecosystem people, best of the creme de la creme, they are saying, thank you, society. I had the free education, I had all these opportunities, and they are not lobbying only for cutting the taxes, they are lobbying for getting more talent here, getting more innovative surroundings. So this is something new to come, and I'm pretty sure that we will double our unicorns and things will evolve. It's not politically motivated in the back old structures that everyone know who is talking to who. This is something that we should learn in the politics and in Europe also, this Californian spirit. Even though after being the deputy vice chair for the US delegation in the last mandate, visited Washington and California often, I now can say that Europe is very predictable market.
During these last 3 years of Russian aggression in Ukraine, we have talked a lot about energy sector, for example, and the kind of changes that has created for Europe and businesses as well. And now my question is, at this point, do you feel that these large-scale changes in security environment or the green transition, how are those affecting your R&D efforts, and is Europe able to, has Europe been able to react sufficiently with, on those changes that are happening around us?
I'd say, of course, when it comes to the geopolitical or other changes in the world, of course, they affect the markets, and hence it also affects us. I'd say that so far minor. So we still believe that the path we have chosen, that the strategy enabling sustainable societies, that will continue. So on the big picture now, of course, we then see that some things are maybe delayed due to these changes that happen around us. But this question is maybe more to those who are in the dual use or defense sector. There's probably been a much larger impact on them.
Yeah. On innovation point of view, how has have we been able to react fast enough?
I've visited several drone companies. They are growing fast, and so it's very dark side of the politics of today. So the finding some positive here is that we have been committing to the spending on military much more. So really hope that the dual use will also there's this spilling over effect. Yeah. So that is something that I want to share a short story. When I visited Pentagon a couple of years ago, still in the Biden administration time, there was a new department, and we met the recently nominated new department leader of Department of Climate Change. And I was like, okay, if they really start doing a research on that one, it will spill over effect and help give something good for the world. So this needs to be happening in Europe as well. And then on Ukraine, I think the colors are good. They are prepared to come closer to the Union. And I'm very happy that during the Soviet times, Ukraine was the hub for so much of science on data and others. Happy to know some great young talent on AI, for example. I'm happy they are on our side, not on the opposition or not on the opposite. So yeah, it was a shake for us on the dependencies, where we were too late to notice that we are too dependent. So even the dependencies is something that companies are in charge, how to have this chain of goods and knowledge. It cannot be taking on the political side fully, but then at least communication there needs to be done. So that's why this strategical autonomy is an issue. It's not anti-trade. There is like 93%, or I don't remember figures anymore, but the Bruegel Institute had the thousands of goods that what we can trade with China and other countries. But then the criticals are not that many. And unfortunately, we didn't mention here, but the raw materials is something serious when you create not vulnerable society. And there we also have been quite late. And then circular economy was something starting from the environmental perspective, but it's really actually also better security on the important raw materials and others. So in the end, I think the titles Europe has had for 5, 10, 15 years are very good. So it's just speed up and do it finally now.
How about you, Lasse? Has your kind of business strategy stayed the same, or have you adjusted it to the changing environment?
Yeah, not that much impact. What we are starting to see, and also reading from Estonia now recently, is that the security landscape starts to impact on the capital investment. That it's seen a risky investment in these Russian border areas, and this discussion starts to come up with the venture capitalists from US, and we're now reading that there are this investment escaping, for example, from Estonia, what was just read on the news. I'm not seeing that much yet in Finland, luckily, but the security landscape is impacting to that. But as mentioned, it also creates opportunities, and especially for startups, which are often fast movers. These big changes and fast changes create opportunities. I think it's more impacting the larger corporations, and also these industries like health industry, which has long time to market and regulation, that fast changes are having a bigger impact. But if you are in the industry area where you can react fast, when you can get to the market fast, these big changes in security environment, in trade economics, all of this, it does create opportunities.
Okay, I would like to change now the topic a little bit to the research side of innovation. And again, I'll start with the audience question here. There's a very point-on question. What should universities do differently to help industry and startups to success in global markets? So, yes, go ahead.
If I may, first of all, go out there, discuss, put yourself on the line, and establish a sort of a personal or organizational communication channel with the companies in question. Understand their pain, but also, of course, let them understand your pain or your need, and then through this discussion, find, okay, how can we help each other? That's not only through the funded projects that you do something, I do something, and then they say we collaborated, which on paper we did, and we reached something. But really to understand, because of course, and don't get me wrong, I'm not putting down the academic world, but there are, of course, in order for that to function, there's a lot of assumptions, and the real world is different. And that's something also then for the real world to understand, okay, that there are these academic limitations, you have to make these. So out there and discuss, reach out, try to see how we can help each other. In short, easier said than done, but yeah.
Anybody else want to contribute?
Could you repeat the question?
Let me read it from here. Let me see. What should universities do in order to make the life of companies and startups easier to scale up to the global markets?
I would just add one small point, which is that I think this is a very, very European problem that comes to its core. We are world-leading in foundational research. We are great at creating things that can, theory behind things that can fly, but we don't want to build flying cars. I always ask myself where that is. Yeah. I think it was Kissinger who said, politics in academia is vicious because there is so little at stake. And maybe it has something to do with the the interface between the business and academia, or it's maybe a question about how we recruit people into academia. I'm an academic myself, so I'm shooting myself in the foot. But there is a distinct European problem, which we don't have in the United States. We don't have that in Asia. We invent the wheel, but we don't want to develop cars. This doesn't add up.
Looks like Lasse wants to say something.
Yeah, it's exactly like when you have the attitude that business, somehow being involved in business takes a credibility away from your academic career.
Yes.
It's the wrong starting point. Like you should be able to be involved in business and to make something out of that foundational research. Another thing is that what I'm constantly seeing is that the funding themes are guiding research at the universities, and sometimes in the wrong way, that these laboratories and universities are looking to stay afloat and having the research going, and then somebody who is doing something very meaningful are pulled to do something else because there is a financing available instead of continuing to do something that could lead to an application or business. So I can see also this directional element of funding happening a lot at universities. In these consortium projects, I'm seeing that all the time, that universities are coming on board and the researchers who are great in different areas are jumping to a totally different area just because there's a funding available.
Yeah. What kind of cooperation is your company doing with universities? Are you doing something at the moment?
Obviously, a lot of clinical research. So clinical studies, we need evidence for our, it's a medical device, we need clinical evidence about the performance, safety, all of that. So we're doing a lot of clinical studies with European universities, academic institutions, as well as in US. So that's the main. But also we have acquired IP from universities. We have, not many startups in Finland do that, but we have done that actually a couple of times. And I guess those are at least the couple examples.
Yeah.
Can I just, sorry.
Yeah, sure.
I'm just saying that I enjoy talking to the young entrepreneurs inside the universities who are complaining that university take too big part of their monies if they succeed, and they have a lot of ideas. Then they compare, London offers this, Tallinn offers this, why Helsinki Espoo only offers this. So there are ideas if we want to be more brave and improve, so just open the ears and do. But at the same time also many startups are based like almost purely to the university research. Worth to mention in Eurooppa-foorumi that new MFF is going to that direction, that should and hopefully will remain so that it will improve that relation. And Finland has been visited by many others that we are doing it. Wärtsilä in Vaasa, living laboratories together with the others, very open boat that is actually a laboratory, and students, many universities, very close. And also new startups now in Finland, 1/3 of them are deep tech startups. And they closely work with the universities, and I see VTT here. So also all that is very, very interesting. And I must even say that I'm asking other way around, that how close it can be if you are university professor and leading big EU things and working for the companies. So how they keep some limits, that what I work with the private companies, not even small ones, but the biggest one, and then do the research at the same time. So it's very well linked in many cases already.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in with, I mean, obviously, if we are doing everything right, there's no problem, right? So it can't just be because we have a few startups in Finland and other Nordic countries. There is a bigger problem at hand. And I think one of the key problems that I found in my personal experience, and I have to become a little bit clean here, as some of the funding, EU R&D funding problems, actually I was a member of the evaluation board that decided on this project. I'm not going to tell you which, because then those sectors are going to try to buy me dinner, and that would be highly inappropriate. But I did ask around and say, why doesn't American or Asian innovation innovative companies participate in European innovation? Why don't they put the innovation centers here? Why aren't they participating in EU-funded research? The answer was very, very clear, which is that one, they don't believe in our consortiums. Why? They're competitors. They are not cooperating with their national companies. If you're Japanese, Panasonic is not going to cooperate with Sony, and they don't believe in the idea of contributing to a common standard, and which will eventually, to be game for everyone. As you mentioned in Silicon Valley, you don't believe in standards at all. It's all proprietary. Microsoft lobbied to Bill Clinton to get rid of the American standard setting organization. And that's why European standards became so prominent in the 90s, because Microsoft didn't believe in national standards. They wanted to set their own proprietary market-driven standards. And this is something that goes straight into basically our way of doing things. It worked very well for 10, 15 years, I think. But ultimately, we are now in a stage in how many of the world's market work, which is that market power is not the same thing as standardization power. Europe still controls many of these standardizations. For example, in 5G, we have full control of 3GPP, thanks to 2 of the 3 companies being Nordic. But that doesn't translate to market shares anymore. And the value of their work has been captured by people who make devices, not networks. And the same goes for the car safety standards. We created every one of them to our benefit, but somehow that failed to generate the market result that we wanted. And in other words, participating in European cluster collective standard setting R&D is contrary to your commercial interest. That's why they are not participating. And I'm wondering, when will European companies start to think the same way?
Kenneth, you had
No, I mean, Josek is right in ways, and I have to admit that we rarely, if ever, go into EU consortia if there's competition in it. In Finland, we don't have, so it's not a problem for us as such. I mean, on some levels, of course, we do, but sort of mainstream now. But then, on the other hand, we do like to go into large projects or consortia where we together can, in our value chain, we are part of that value chain, but together we can make 1 + 1 more than 2. And to understand that, okay, how can we change our thing so that the person downstream or the entity downstream can improve the overall efficiency and these kinds of, so how can we together then make a better offering to the end customer? So these we really like to go into.
Very interesting.
I want to quickly comment on these like startups coming out from the research. Is that's something that has been changing rapidly, and that's so great to see. Like my first startup almost 20 years ago was a spin-off from research. CardioSignal is a spin-off from research, and the amount of companies spinning off from research at that time compared to now, it's a big change. Around that time, the slush was organized first time, whole startup culture has been built. Now there are VC funds led by students. If you haven't check the Wave VC, for example. There is like it's been a big shift there, and that's so cool to see in a startup environment in Finland.
Great to hear, and we heard also that maybe in the kind of EU side has been moving forward. I'm looking at our timetable, and our ticker is already flashing red here. So unfortunately, we are running out of time. I suppose this discussion could have continued for at least 1 hour more. Thank you for our panelists for these excellent insights. I think this discussion has shown that innovation policy is not just a technical matter, but a strategic choice for Europe, and should be. So thank you very much, and have a nice rest of Eurooppa-forum. Thank you.
Thank you.